I'm curious. Maybe you should do a video on how to fix Zavok and the rest of the 6. That would be an interesting video. That might be interesting, but I'm not sure I'm creative enough to do that, though. Nah, I believe in you. You can do it. Not gonna lie, that made me smile, so let's give it a shot. Hello everybody, and welcome to whatever this is. Not really sure what to call it aside from Let's Fix the Deadly Six, since I'll be rewriting these zany Zetis to be something more along the lines of something I would consider competent characters. Well, at least in my mind. This is just how I would do it. I know there are going to be people that disagree with me. Just keep in mind that this isn't meant to insult you for liking the Zeti. I just don't, and I feel like they could have been done a little bit better. So my main problem with these characters, if you can even call them that, is that they're incredibly one-note and forgettable. I made an entire video about why I disliked Zavok specifically last week, and you can watch that here for a better understanding of why I think he sucks, but the complaints against him honestly work for the whole gang. Sure, there are some moments that got a chuckle out of me, dialogue-wise, but that doesn't really change the fact that these guys are worth nothing on their own. So one of the things I decided to do for this video is redefine the dynamic of the team of Zeti, so I think now would be a good time as any to explain the new thing I cooked up for them. So starting with the big boy himself, Zavok is the leader, and he's dang well gonna make sure everyone remembers that. Zavok is cold and aggressive, but also level-headed and strategic. Zavok will employ any tactic he deems necessary to defeat his foes, and he does not respond well to failure. Zavok talks to and acts towards the other Deadly Six in different ways depending on how useful they are to him. And going from least to most useful, the Zeti rank like this: Zaz, Zor, Xena, Zalmam, and Zik. I was originally thinking Zavok would put Zalmam at the very bottom because of his lack of intelligence, but that actually makes it much easier for Zavok to command him, meaning he's one of the more useful members of the group in his eyes. This doesn't stop Zavok from dragging him through the mud when he messes up though, because at the end of the day, the only one he truly cares about in the scenario is Zik, but we'll get into that in a minute. Zaz is just as crazy as ever in this scenario, and this craziness causes him to be the wild card of the group, landing him at the very bottom of Zavok's usefulness chart. Zaz drives Zavok up a wall whenever they're forced to interact, and Zaz enjoys having that effect on Zavok because it makes him feel some kind of power over their almighty leader. He's not ambivalent enough to Zavok's commands that he would want to go off on his own, but he doesn't like being told what to do, which is really what his personality comes down to. Zalmam is relatively the same, as I don't think it's important that all 6 of them are totally different. With Zalmam remaining his one-track-minded self, it makes him a useful tool for Zavok and the others to boss around. This can help show how cruel characters like Zavok can be, or how manipulative someone like Xena can be. And speaking of Xena, she now has progressed past her role in the original game of just girl. Xena knows that she can't budge Zavok or Zik, so she spends most of her time trying to wind the other 3 Zeti around her little finger. When push comes to shove, she does what Zavok orders, but she puts her own little spin on things, assuming she knows better. This usually includes having one of the other 3 Zeti make the task easier for her, and then she comes along and reaps all the rewards. And next up is Zor, who I constantly forget even exists. He's pretty similar to his original counterpart as well, but there are new reasonings behind it. Zor is really pessimistic and doesn't believe that anything they do really matters, but that's mostly because he knows that Zavok is the one that gets things done. Zor never has to worry about manning the front lines because Zavok has lulled him into a false sense of security, and thus pessimism. Zavok chooses to ignore Zor's blaming of him for the way he acts though, and instead he just labels him lazy. He does at least listen to Zavok though, so that's more than that can be said for Zaz. And last but certainly not least, we have Master Zik. Zik is the mentor to Zavok and he cares a great deal about him. That being said, he also cares a lot about the other Zeti, as in this revision he takes on more of a Master Splinter type approach to the group, and considers them a family. He's still evil, he still wants to see the world below them burn, and he still wants to take revenge on Eggman for harming his family, but he has these extra feelings on top of the already present evil to give him a little bit more depth. Zik is also the only Zeti out of the other 5 that Zavok considers a real ally and not a pawn, and he trusts him, which will be really important for later. Now, to truly rewrite the Zeti, I figured it also makes sense to rewrite Lost World a tad, since that was their origin. Hopefully this doesn't come off as a garbage fanfiction video, but I couldn't see any better way to elaborate on how I would change them without going back to the source and altering things. The game begins as normal with Sonic chasing Eggman to the Lost Hex, and Eggman still takes control of the Zeti as he does in the original. But when it comes time for Sonic to meet his new foes for the first time, the changes start rolling in. Eggman introduces the Deadly Six, and there's none of that weird, shadowy figure nonsense. You get a glimpse of all 6 of them looking pretty perturbed about their enslavement, with Zavok front and center, staring Sonic down, not saying a word. Eggman would call for Zaz to take Sonic out like in the original, and after Zaz gets up close and personal with Sonic, Zavok would instead step forward and demand that Zaz return to the pack, insisting that he could take care of the little blue rat without expending too much effort. Eggman would blow the conch shell, clearly not liking the insubordination, but Zavok would grimace through it as the others cower behind him in pain. Zavok would reassure Eggman that he could have his troubles end now if he is allowed to deal with Sonic, or they could continue if he insists on Zaz taking the first shot. Eggman begrudgingly tells Zavok that there will be dire repercussions if he can't follow through on his word, and Eggman and the other Zeti retreat, leaving Zavok with Sonic and Tails. This is the point where Sonic banters at Zavok as he normally does, and Zavok is having none of it. This effectively means that Zavok is the first boss of the game instead of Zaz, but it's for the very important reason of giving Zavok a greater presence in the story and more time to develop his character, since Sega seems to want to focus on him these days. After Zavok is dispatched by Sonic, Sonic once again asks what their deal is and why they're working with Eggman. Zavok would elaborate on his team very briefly and then move on to talking about himself, but not before dismissing the others as if they were inconsequential to him. He would go into great detail about how he leads his squad with an iron fist, and how they're the scourge of the Lost Hex because of his abilities and ruthlessness. Sonic would chide him for working alongside Eggman, who Sonic insists will inevitably fail in the end as he always does, and a low growl can be heard from Zavok as he turns away. He vows to defeat Sonic at any cost for the humiliation he suffered, before leaping into the distance to rejoin his squad and the Doctor. Now we come to a change that would affect gameplay a little bit, but it's for the purpose of furthering the Zeti's characters. In this revised version of the script, I'm pushing Zavok to be much more intimidating and present during the story so you have more time as a player to get to know him. I propose that instead of fighting the Zeti one-on-one like in the original, Zavok is always there beside the Zeti you would have fought in that world. If you remember back, the final world in Lost World did something like this, except my version changes things even further. Zavok would be there to put an interesting twist on the battle, all the while showing off his leadership qualities as well. This would also provide a look at how Zavok feels about each of his teammates that he's fighting alongside, which in turn shows us even more about Zavok himself. So with that in mind, the boss fights that would normally occur during Sonic's trek through Desert Land are changed up a bit. During the first fight, where Sonic free falls onto Zamom's weird Rubik's Cube mask, Zavok would be there barking out orders to Zamom to move the mask around so Sonic would have a harder time landing on it, whilst also firing fire blasts at him as he falls in hopes to preemptively stop him. Upon trying to attack Zavok, he would simply knock Sonic away, perhaps letting out a little quip about not falling for that again, and Sonic's main target in these fights will always be the secondary Zeti. Zavok is just an extra hindrance. Once Zamom gets hit, Zavok would berate him, and the battle would continue as it did before until the finishing blow is dealt. Zamom would apologize to Zavok and curse Sonic, and Zavok would let out an angry growl before grabbing Zamom by the scruff of his neck and leaping away. Next up we got the Zeti's big break. This cutscene would go fairly similar to the original, since I really like the idea of Sonic having to learn from his mistakes, except instead of seeming like all the Zeti are in control of Eggman's badniks, it would clearly just be Zavok giving the orders. Zavok would then command Zaz, Zamom, and Xena to go after Eggman, while afterwards he'd turn to Zik and bequeath control of the badniks to him momentarily while he goes after Sonic. Sonic saves Tails, and then they begin to retreat as Eggman, Orbot, and Cubot get knocked around by the Zeti and then follow close behind. Zavok would then decide against pursuing them any further, but he would call after the lot of them, taunting them for their idiocy. Now I'm gonna leave most of the Sonic and Co cutscenes alone, because I feel like they work pretty well enough, but there will be some changes down the line to accommodate Zavok and the gang's alterations. The next cutscene we should see should probably have something to do with the machine that Eggman was going to use to harness the energy from the world below. I don't really know if the Zeti were content staying on the Lost Hex before Sonic and Eggman showed up, but now they have the means to cause some real damage and a vendetta against Eggman and Sonic, so they decide to use the device to destroy their world and gain ultimate power. Zavok then turns to Master Zik, who would tell Zavok how proud of him he is for coming up with such a plan, as it gets back at their enemies and it helps them become even stronger at the same time. Zavok would reassure Zik that if it weren't for his wisdom and years of training, that he would probably be as incompetent as Zamom, to which Zik does not respond to, and he avoids Zavok's gaze as he lets out an unamused laugh. Zavok laughs in response, not picking up on his master's subtle irritation, and tells him that he looks forward to battling Sonic alongside him, as it will feel just like old times. He then walks away into the darkness laughing. The boss fights with Zik would once again include Zavok doing something that would make things a lot less convenient for you. I assume he'd frequently take a defensive position in front of Zik, while Zik launches wave after wave of fruits at you until Sonic is able to knock a fruit into Zavok, which would cause him to falter on his defenses, allowing you to take Zik out. Upon their defeat, Zavok would hoist the beaten Zik into his arms and let out a malice-filled roar before jumping away. Zavok would then return to Eggman's base with Zik, and the other Zeti would cautiously approach, knowing Zavok would be in a bad mood, but their concern for Zik overpowers that. Zavok lays Zik down near the others and he stomps away, clearly very agitated. Zik would call out to him, saying that it's only a matter of time before they would defeat him, but Zavok doesn't turn around to talk to his master and instead grumbles something under his breath and shakes his head. The other Zeti stay with Zik and he thanks them for their concern. Zik tells Xena that she should be the next to try and defeat Sonic, much to her surprise, and she seems really uninterested until Zik tells her that he really believes she could do it since she's really resourceful. The praise that he gives her causes her to run off after Zavok into the darkness, leaving the other three behind. Since we're rewriting Lost World a bit here, I must say we're safe to remove the snowball level, because it's, you know, the snowball level. This of course means that the Xena Fight is entirely different. I sort of think borrowing from the 3DS version would work well here. Xena sits atop a giant snowman, which beforehand you can see being rolled into place by Zamom, who clearly did all the work for her, and a giant gust of wind pushes Sonic back so he can't just run up to attack her. Zavok would also be on the battlefield, rushing to Sonic's position while fighting the wind to try and deliver some strong punches to knock Sonic backwards, so he'd have to gain ground all over again. Attacking the snowman enough times would land Xena on the ground, and the toppled snowman would bury Zavok for a few moments, giving Sonic enough time to attack Xena. Her second boss fight would still involve the snowman heads with the lasers, but this time Zavok would punt one of them so the lasers would move around a lot quicker and be harder to dodge. But he'd also be too distracted doing that to protect Xena, so she would go down much like in the original fight. At the end of the battle, Zavok would stand over Xena and shake his head in disgust before leaping away. Xena would then stand up, grit her teeth at Sonic, and take off as well. Now comes more fun parts. We drop back in after Zavok and Xena's defeat, and Zavok is livid that Sonic has been able to trounce all of them so far. He yells at the other Zeti, calling them useless, and he doesn't even stop when Zik tells him to calm himself. It's at this point we realize that Zavok is starting to prioritize making Sonic pay for what he's done, rather than being a good leader, as he turns to Zor and says, "Speaking of useless, it's time you pulled some weight around here." Zor would protest, saying that he never has to because Zavok usually is enough to finish the job, but not this time apparently. Zavok does not take kindly to this accusation, and he grabs Zor, hoists him over his shoulder, and begins walking away from the rest of the group, despite the angry protests that can be heard from behind them coming from Master Zik. Before the Zor boss fight though, Master Zik devises a plan to capture Sonic, as he recalls how reckless the Hedgehog can be. The plan is put into action, and this is where Tails' captured cutscene comes into play, although Zavok and Zor don't know about it yet. Sonic comes across Zor and demands to know where Tails is, and this time Zor honestly doesn't know what he's talking about, which only makes Sonic angrier. Zavok steps in once again and taunts Sonic by saying, "And here I thought you valued friendship over all else. One would think you'd keep a better eye on those you care about." Zor's first fight would be pretty much the same, except now Zor would look even less willing to fight than he already did, merely reclining on top of the owl robot as Sonic has to kick the projectiles back at him. Zavok, however, would leap into the air and knock the projectile back at Sonic multiple times before it would rush past him to hit Zor and daze Zavok. Think of it kind of like the tennis matches that Link and Ganondorf play sometimes. The second fight would be another departure from the original. Zor would make the area pitch black as he did in the original, but there would be no pulleys to light it up. Instead, Sonic is meant to use his kick move on Zavok, who in a fit of anger would shoot some fireballs in a few directions, giving the player enough light to see Zor and land some hits on him. When the battle ends, however, Zor would lose his balance upon trying to stand up and plummet down the waterfall. Zavok would then let out a roar of pure frustration aimed directly at Sonic, but you don't get the sense that it's because his friend fell, it's more because he's just angry at Sonic. Zavok would then return to the base without Zor, and he'd find the remaining Zeti strapping Tails to the same table where he was going to be roboticized in the original. Zik would ask where Zor was, and Zavok would tell him that he's taking the long way back, not actually caring whether or not that was true. Zavok is angry at the team at first for doing something like this behind his back, but then when Xena tells him that they're going to turn Tails into something they can use against Sonic, he smiles wickedly and begins laughing to himself. He puts a hand on Zaz and tells him that it's finally time for him to let loose, and the two exit the base while Zik, Xena, and Zelmom return their focus to Tails. Remember, the beginning of the game still happened the same way it always did, so Eggman walked them through the process of turning animals into robots. Zavok and Zaz would show themselves around Sonic, and Zaz would let out that "you're going home in a box" line, because I really liked it because of how morbid it was, and then the two would get ready to fight Sonic again. Sonic can tell something is different about Zavok because he seems calmer, and Zavok laughs it off, saying that he made a new friend, and he can't wait for Sonic to meet him. Sonic assumes he's talking about Tails, which pumps him up for the battle. Since these were originally Zavok's boss battles, Zaz takes a back seat here while Zavok and Sonic go mostly one-on-one, but Zaz does chime in during points of the battle against Zavok's wishes. As Sonic tries to homing attack his way up the Dragon Mech, Zaz would jump in the way, causing his progress to halt so Sonic can knock Zaz out of the way with a kick, which in turn messes up the attack that Zavok had been charging in the background and allows Sonic to attack Zavok. In the second fight, as Sonic is dodging lasers and Zavok's attacks, Zaz would again pop in an effort to surprise attack Sonic and steal the kill for himself, which once again distracts Zavok long enough for Sonic to get a fully charged homing attack in to deal the final blow that'll knock him off the snake, ending the battle. Zaz then looks down into the pit and laughs at Zavok before leaving the fight. Zaz is thrown into the dimly lit base as the next cutscene starts. Zavok enters huffing and puffing, fire glowing in his throat. Zaz backs up the other Zeti as Zavok furiously demands that they all prepare for the next fight by using the machine to power up. Zik protests, but Zavok doesn't take no for an answer. Zik argues further that Zavok has let his animosity for the Hedgehog get in the way of all the progress he's made over the years. Zik hardly recognizes the Zeti he used to consider his best student, and Zik tells the others that they don't need to stay with Zavok and they can leave to avoid his self-destructive tendencies and they can find their own way in life. And if Zavok hadn't snapped already, this is the point where there's no turning back for him. He doesn't hear Zik's words, but he does hear the betrayal. His master was going against his plan, the one he trusted more than anyone, the one that he thought would always have his back. Yeah, none of that matters now. Zavok launches a fireball in the Zeti's direction, which is promptly blocked by Zik, who stares him down and says he doesn't know what he saw in him in the first place. Xena, Zelmom, and Zik begin walking away from the scene, but Zaz doesn't move. Zaz is too enticed by the promise of more power, and he realizes that he has more in common with Zavok than he once realized. Much to Zik's dismay, Zaz tells him to beat it, and Zaz and Zavok walk off to use the machine. The cutscene where Eggman dies plays, leaving Sonic totally alone, and afterwards he meets up with Zavok and Zaz. Sonic would demand to know where they're keeping Tails, and the two of them would laugh at him. "Oh, you'll see him soon enough, Hedgehog. Or you would if your journey wasn't about to come to a close here and now." Zaz would pipe in saying that they're all juiced up on the energy from Sonic's world, but it's too bad about all those dumb critters down there, though. Sonic would then take a second to contact Knuckles and Amy, and he would get that whole final message from Amy thing from the original game, and then after that he rests Tails' iPad on the ground and the battle with Zaz and Zavok begins. Now there's no boss rush since the other Zeti took off, so this is a two-phase fight where Zaz and Zavok employ the old techniques they've already used in their old boss fights, except there's like 2 battles in a row and it's a little bit harder. I don't really have anything else for that. This battle and level would also take place a lot closer to the machine that the Zeti used to power up for reasons I'll elaborate on in a moment. Zavok then roars at the top of his lungs at his inability to destroy Sonic, and he decides that now is the time for drastic measures. He kicks the machine into overdrive and he yells about how he doesn't care if he has to drain both Sonic's world and the Lost Hex of their power. He will do anything to destroy Sonic. Both Sonic and Zaz are taken aback by this, and Zaz, of all people, tries to reason with him. He says that if they just try again with the power they have, he's sure they could wear Sonic down. Zaz actually seeming sort of sane next to Zavok, who has lost it at this point. Zavok growls viciously about how none of the Zeti were ever worth anything to him, and that goes double for now. They've always been disappointments, and he doesn't need anyone's help to finish what he started. Zaz starts to say something, but Zavok blasts him with a fireball, sending him over a cliff, much like what happened to Eggman earlier. Sonic is horrified at this behavior and chastises Zavok for attacking the people that are just trying to help him, and Zavok laughs at this. The machine begins flashing red and emitting a warning light saying that soon the damage done to both worlds will become permanent if the effect isn't reversed, so Sonic charges Zavok. Zavok gives Sonic a taunting like ah with the finger wag as the roboticized Tails leaps down from above, stopping Sonic his path. Sonic doesn't notice the robotic enhancements as the dust is still settling and is really happy to see Tails, but as the dust clears, his words catch in his throat. Zavok laughs from behind Tails and gloats. "I may not need anybody's help to stop you, but I wasn't about to forego the pleasure of seeing that broken look on your face when you realized what I did to your friend. I don't even care if he puts up a fight for you. I'll take pleasure in watching you have to go through him to get to me." The machine continues beeping, warning of critical levels of danger just as Tails pulls himself together like he does in the original. He sends a blast Zavok's way and he dodges, but the pair notice that he's glowing thanks to the influence of the machine. Tails flies to the machine and powers it down, causing Zavok to roar so loud it shakes the ground. Sonic rushes Tails to safety and returns as Zavok is pulsating with power and growing larger, all while shooting fireballs into the air. Now 100% out of control thanks to the pure blind fury and newfound power. Zavok looks down at Sonic and just barely chokes out one last threat, telling him that his world and his life are about to come to an end. Eggman does not reprise his role as the final boss, because that was dumb to begin with. Giant Zavok is repurposed from your last encounter with him in the main game, but the fight is totally different and not super easy. I imagine a giant 3D battle arena where Zavok starts off the fight in the middle, and the area Sonic runs around is on like around waist height to him. Zavok would rain down fireballs and punch attacks to try and slow Sonic down, but what he doesn't suspect is that Sonic is going to use his kick move on the fists right before he pulls them back to his body, resulting in him losing balance and swaying back and forth slightly. After this, Sonic has to do the same thing to the other arm, and Zavok will be off balance enough that Sonic can leap onto one of his arms, parkour up it, and do a multi-homing attack, like in the original final fight, on Zavok's horns, eyes, and then his nose, which sends him stumbling backwards, which destroys a bit of the arena. You have to do this 3 times before Zavok is defeated, and each time the arena becomes smaller, so it's much harder to dodge his punch attacks and fireballs, and any other miscellaneous obstacles that might find their way onto the battlefield. As the battle concludes, Zavok begins shrinking down to normal size, and before he passes out from exhaustion, he curses Sonic one last time. Zavok faints, and the battle is over. Tails rushes back to Sonic and congratulates him on a fight well done. Then Sonic asks Tails if it's possible for him to reverse the machine to save both their world and the Lost Hex, because Sonic is just a good guy like that. Tails confesses that while he was able to power down the machine, Eggman's shoddy programming caught him off guard and he couldn't figure out how to reverse the effects. Sonic looks dismayed at this, but from behind them they hear, "Ahem, just because you're not smart enough to comprehend my genius doesn't mean you can dismiss it as shoddy." The camera pans back over to Eggman as he lands nearby using his jetpack. Orbot and Cubot are with him, but they look significantly worse for wear, and Eggman's clothes are a tad singed. Eggman pushes the shocked pair aside and types some commands into the console. The machine's light turns green and the energy begins pouring back into the worlds. Sonic is sort of surprised that Eggman willingly reversed the machine, but Eggman has had more than enough of the Lost Hex and its inhabitants, and he didn't quite like the fact that someone else was destroying the world that he vowed to make his own. After all, he was only planning on stealing a small bit of energy himself. Sonic and Tails chuckle at this as Eggman lets out a small sneer. He asserts that just because he had no choice to work with them this time, it doesn't mean he won't come back more ruthless than ever. He begins walking away and then he throws in, "Though it might be a little while because I don't quite fancy near-death experiences." Orbot and Cubot would agree with him as they fly off back down to their world below. Sonic and Tails would take a moment to call Knuckles and Amy and they see everything is returning to normal. They notice Zavok shifting slightly on the ground beside them, and Sonic thinks it's best if they just take off and let Zavok be alone if that's what he really wants. The two head back to the tornado, leaving the Lost Hex saved, Zavok alone, and the rest of the Zeti most likely better off for not having to be under his command anymore. The final shot of the game is Sonic and Tails flying towards the sunset as Zavok stares in the foreground. He lifts himself weakly to one knee and lets out a sigh before punching the ground, leaving a sizable dent. The camera then goes back to Sonic and Tails as the credits begin to roll, with the two of them flying through the clouds back home. And that's pretty much it. That's all I was really thinking about in terms of the Zeti. I feel like Zavok got a big spotlight here, but again, if Sega's the one that wants to bring him back over and over again, then maybe he should get the most development, right? I don't know if the others are any better or not. I'll leave that up to you. Again, though, at the end of the day, this is just probably something I would have gone with if I was in charge of the story. I kind of wanted to make it so the characters felt more memorable or more like characters. They had more motivations, they had more emotions, stuff like that, you know? They're not just cut and dry, evil cookie cutter molds for random traits, you know, like they used to be? I don't know. Maybe I didn't do any better at all. Please let me know what you liked and you didn't like about this in the comments section below. And I just want to say, I think I had a lot of fun doing this. It's kind of fun looking back at the game and re-examining some things and trying to change things around. I don't know, if you really like this, maybe I could try it with some of the other games. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's just all fun and games, so no need to get upset. So that's going to be all for today, so if you like this video and you haven't already, please make sure you subscribe, click the bell, follow my Twitter, and join the Discord to keep up with more Sonic hypotheticals and other things that aren't Sonic hypotheticals, because I do a lot of things. I'd also like to give a huge thank you to my current sponsors, Nick46, Jaded Indolent, Silva PhD, Bob the Hedgehog Gamer, Game Masters, Cringe Channel, Cosmic Mushroom, Lucas Tallman, Nico the Person, Mitron, Kenneth Gutierrez, Knuckles Channel 3 and Knuckles, Henry S., Rob Morrison, Mega Trafficone, Creative, and Mike TGC. Thank you guys so much for sponsoring, it really means a lot. Helps me do things like this, just having fun, I really appreciate that. If you have any interest in becoming a sponsor yourself, you can always check out the link in the description to find all of the perks and junk, such as being shouted out at the end of every single video and stream. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.